When you think about the American Revolution, what comes to mind? Probably muskets, cannons, maybe those big, impressive, tall ships of the Continental Navy. But what if I told you that one of the keys to victory wasn't forged in a foundry, but was actually grown in a field? We're about to dive into the really surprising story of how a common farm crop became a critical weapon of war. Well, the answer is this really cool mix of economics, just sheer necessity, and an incredible amount of hard work. You see, that simple plant was hemp, and its tough fibers were absolutely essential for rigging the sails and supplying all the ropes for both the Continental Navy and the Army. So before the Revolution, hemp was a pretty common sight in Virginia, but it was nowhere near being a major industry. It was more of a household craft. Families grew it and processed it right on their own farms, mostly just to make coarse cloth for themselves. We're talking really small scale, local, and definitely not the kind of thing you could build a war effort on. This comparison really shows you the massive shift that happened. I mean, it's night and day. Hemp went from being this domestic good, something just for the family, to a strategic material that was vital for the military. It literally transformed from a quiet farm activity into a large-scale, government-backed industry, and it happened almost overnight. And you know what? People actually saw this problem coming decades earlier. All the way back in 1731, guys like Freyer Hall were pointing out just how dangerously dependent Virginia was on Great Britain for finished goods like linen and sailcloth. They had the raw material right there in their fields, but they just didn't have the industry to process it. So when the Revolution broke out, that dependence turned into a huge vulnerability. All of a sudden, Virginia was at war with the very country that supplied all these essential goods. And, well, you know what they say, necessity quickly became the mother of invention. And just look at how fast this all happened. The war starts in 75, and boom, the British blockade immediately cuts off the supply of sailcloth and rope, everything a navy needs. But by the very next year, 1776, Virginia has already set up the Williamsburg Manufactory to solve the problem. It was a direct, super fast, and absolutely vital response to a military crisis. Okay, so how did they actually do it? How do you turn a tough, stringy plant stock into the ropes and sails you need to outfit a warship? Let me tell you, it was an incredibly tough, multi-step process that took a ton of brute force and a surprising amount of skill. It all started with breaking, which is where they shattered the woody core of the plant. Then came scutching, and that involved just relentlessly beating the stalks with a wooden knife to separate the good fibers from the waste. And finally, heckling. This was a crucial and really difficult step where the fibers were combed through sharp spikes over and over to clean them up and get them ready for spinning. And this right here is the key tool for that final step, the heckle. Just imagine a giant, pretty menacing-looking comb. Using one of these took real skill. A really experienced heckler could get twice the amount of quality fiber from the same amount of raw material as a newbie. This wasn't just labor. It was a skilled trade, and it was vital to the whole operation. And this image gives you a real sense of the raw, physical labor we're talking about. The scutching knife wasn't some tiny blade. It was a big wooden board they used to just whack the hemp again and again. This was tough, repetitive, back-breaking work, but it was absolutely essential to get the raw material ready. Okay, so all this carefully processed fiber then went to the heart of this new industry, Virginia's Great Rope Walks. These were these long, specialized buildings where workers would spin the fibers into the gigantic lengths of cordage and rope that the Continental Navy so desperately needed. And this wasn't just happening in one random spot. Major production hubs popped up all across Virginia, in key towns like Williamsburg, Fredericksburg, Richmond, and Alexandria. This was a massive, coordinated effort that turned the entire state into a manufacturing powerhouse for the Revolution. In fact, these workers were so important that the government considered their work absolutely vital. Get this, skilled rope makers were often granted exemptions from having to serve in the military. They were essentially fighting the war, not with a musket, but with their manufacturing skills. And the scale of this production was pretty impressive. In just one 7-month period, a single private rope walk in Fredericksburg delivered over 3,700 pounds of cordage to the cause. Now just imagine the total output from all the rope walks across the entire state. But here's where the story takes a really interesting twist. This booming industry, born from the absolute necessities of war, faced its greatest threat. Not from an enemy army, but from something you probably wouldn't expect: peace. Yeah, it's a pretty stark outcome. The war ends in 1783, and almost immediately, this vital industry just collapses. The very things that created it, the British blockade, and the urgent need for war materials, they just vanished the moment the peace treaty was signed.
So here's the breakdown. Virginia's hemp products were a wartime necessity, right? They were protected from any foreign competition by that British blockade. But after the war, they just couldn't compete with Russian hemp, which came flooding into the open market. It was considered higher quality, and, importantly, it was much, much cheaper. The industry that was a strategic asset in wartime just couldn't survive in a peacetime global economy.
It all leaves us with a fascinating question to think about. The story of Virginia's hemp industry shows how a major crisis can create entire industries practically out of thin air. It's a powerful reminder that our economic landscape is constantly being shaped by forces we can't always control. And it really makes you wonder, right? What industries that we consider essential today were born from a similar moment of necessity, and how fragile might they be if those conditions suddenly change?